Right. So, in the last session, we have discussed about the source configuration and how this can be configured whenever we are performing some integration and all everything. So, this is all something which we have discussed in the last session. Where in today's session, I'm going to discuss about the data mapping, especially when we are working on ServiceNow integration. When we are making some configurations and integrations to ServiceNow application with any external systems or all that. It's always important for us to understand about the importance of data mapping. So before I am getting into data mapping, let me explain you. So what exactly data mapping is all about? In context to that, what exactly the integrations and all everything we do. Whenever we are working on application development, there are some procedures and policies we follow when you want to perform some integration process in regular intervals. In this regard, so whenever we are performing integration process, it's always important for us to migrate the data. Whatever the data migration and all everything is what something which we need to be performed with. Now, whenever we are doing some data migrations or whenever we are performing some data integrations all, so it is an immense importance where we have to perform the migration process where we have to extract the data from the existing application. This is what something which we have to do. So when it comes to this, it's always important where we need to map the data because let's say, for example, we are configuring ServiceNow application now for IT service management. Earlier, they have a other IT service management tool, for example. So the data what IT service management earlier application was different, now it is different. So what we have to do now, whatever the required configuration you want to make, whenever you want to make any kind of changes to the existing one, it's always important for you to understand about how this data can be mapped or how this can be imparted. This is where generally the data migration process comes into picture. Means you have to convert the old data to the new data. Okay, so this is where generally we call it as data migration process. Let us understand about the data migration process first, then I'll get into data mapping. Now, this is where generally the data migration process is. So when we want to perform the data migration process, there are different steps are there, right? So the first step is called user discovery. The second one about the ETL process. The third one about vendor output creation and testing and go live. So these are the four major phases you see in data migration. When we are migrating the data, whatever the data mapping required, we want to be performed because of this reason. Okay, data mapping is needed when we are performing some data migration part. So when we are performing this data, when we are performing this data migration, as far as the first step under user discovery, wherein we need to identify the scope of data migration, wherein by any of the users or IT teams when they are doing. So we need to ensure what kind of scope we have for data migration based on the data what we have now. Based on it, now we have to review the images and documents, whatever is required, because old system, old data formats is something different when we are comparing today. So we need to review the images and as well as documenting the requirements now. The next stage is called ETL, which is called as extract, transform, and load the data. This is where generally ETL process. We have different ETL tools now and then we use to extract the data, to transform the data, and as well as to load the data, all that. In this regard, so first of all, we need to set up a staging environment for data migration. Next, we need to extract the data from the existing system. At the same time, we need to load the information system into the staging database. So once we have loaded information into the staging database, make sure we need to perform the cleaning. At the same time, we need to transform the loading to the new system. Everything we have to do in this regard, in the ETL process itself. So once we have cleaned the data cleaning all, of course, data cleaning for that, we have different tools now and then we are using. That's a different thing. So we need to locate and extract the migration of the existing images and everything we have to do in this ETL process. So once the ETL process is done, the next one about vendor output creation. In this, we need to, based on the vendor requirements, whatever are needed, we need to understand the output of the data as in when whatever the format we require, either it can be The file formats may be in XML or JSON. Right? All these things we need to understand from the vendor output creation. So once the vendor output creation is done, the next we need to go for testing and go live, where we need to schedule the data into the staging database by performing some iterative testing. Make sure until it has to be approved by the customer. Okay. So after this, whatever the final extraction and process of go live, the existing application can be done. So these are the different migration processes which normally we need to understand first. So in this process, whenever we are talking about this data mapping, as far as the present process is concerned, here we need to add the tables, whatever the target table do we have and all, so that we need to search here. So here we have to search the .NET, the table here, right? So we need to set whichever the table you want to configure. Okay, so whatever the kind of application groups we have. So all these things that we have to be mapped. So for example, we are taking some let's say we have taken, for example, action configuration. Okay, action configuration is a table we have to take. So whenever we have taken action configuration, if you want to map it, because when you are performing configuration part, that action has to be performed. So for that, we need to run the tables based on the business rules when we are importing it. Because business rules is what something which we need to create. So we need to run the tables using the business rules when we are importing it. So that we have to select. Finally, if you can click on save, automatically this new mapping will be done accordingly. So here you can see action configuration is completed, wherein the mapping of data will be taken time. Of course, it will not be done immediately. Not at map, it takes time, right? So because we need to search for the properties and all, we need to define the properties. Once the defining of the properties was done so far, so if there is any kind of editing of mapping, right? So wherein we need to perform mapping properties by adding the fields, right? So whatever the required fields, if you want to be added and all, everything, we have to add these fields. Then based on the category, whatever we have chosen and all, you can add the fields whenever it is needed and whatever is needed. So that is all something which we need to be performed. Because in the source configuration, we have already taken the data, employee data was taken. So this is where generally this data mapping, everything we do. So this is how generally the data mapping we do whenever we are working on ServiceNow configurations and integrations while we are performing the ServiceNow application. As in when already mentioned earlier, whenever people who are applying business analyst jobs, because business analysts are the people who will be gathering the requirements and providing subsequent solutions. They must be having some technical knowledge, some configuration, data migration. At the same time, data mapping knowledge is required now and then for a BA. For them, it is useful. At the same time, this is useful even for ServiceNow administrators who are performing configuration as well as integration, ServiceNow administrators. Even now and then, even developers also required, because developers will write the line of code relating to the mapping and integration. So even developers and ETL people, right? So ETL professionals, these people are also required. So this is all about data mapping and data migration for first, and following that, whatever the data mapping we do and how this can be done by adding some mapping properties, by understanding about the source release, right? So because source we have created as a release. In the last video, I have shown that. So this is how generally we do this, right? So this is all about the session today.